When I went to university, I picked up an art history minor, partially because I already met half of the requirements due to my major, but also because I thought it was genuinely interesting. These classes got me thinking about art more critically, taught me to look beyond obvious appearances, and gave me an appreciation for the effort and hard work that goes into the creation of masterpieces. And naturally, this appreciation also came with a lot of questions and discussions. There are quite a few arguments that can be made regarding the validity of certain art forms, questions about what even constitutes as art, is this really a masterwork or is it just a toilet, and so on and so forth. But today we're throwing all of these out the window in pursuit of a higher goal, an even more noble question. The question of what artworks best fit the Twisted Wonderland cast? I can think of no better use for this piece of my expensive degree, so today I will be providing my picks for my favorite boys from Twist. Because this script got way out of hand, way too fast in the production stages, so if I didn't cut it down, we would be here forever. But that does mean there's room for a sequel, so if y'all end up enjoying your time here and want a part 2, just let me know down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you do. Like always, we'll be discussing EN server story content throughout this video and a bit of the Savannah Claw manga, so consider this your spoiler warning. However, I have edited this video in such a way that the painting overviews are separated from the Twist Boy connections, so if you just want to listen to me yap about art and my interpretations of these pieces without getting spoiled for Twist, you can do that too. Also, it's important to note that art cannot be talked about without context, and that context often involves politics, religion, and history, all things which I typically don't engage with on this channel. However, there's no way around them for this type of consideration, so these topics will be discussed solely from an academic standpoint during the video, and since the newest piece in this list is from 1890, none of these topics will be explicitly contemporary. Any conclusions or associations you draw will be your own. Now then, our first painting up for consideration is The Gleaners by Jean-François Millet. The work depicts 3 female subjects in a wheat field post-harvest, with each of the figures focused on the ground beneath them. 2 of the figures have one of their hands outstretched, picking up something off of the ground, while their other hands are holding several shafts of wheat. The third figure seems about ready to do the same, with her eyes fixed on a spot that her hand begins to move towards as she herself begins to bend. Her other hand is also occupied by several shafts of wheat. Off in the distance, less detailed figures can be seen picking and stacking harvested wheat in piles, while a man on horseback watches from a distance. The 3 women at the forefront of the painting are depicted in simple clothes, doing manual labor, seemingly unaware of or too preoccupied with their current task to notice that they are being watched by the viewer. The golden glow of the setting sun not only gives the work a warm overtone, but some context, as the task of gleaning could only be done after the harvesting, which would have taken most of the day, or at least in this case it did. This task, of course, gives us the name of the painting and describes the work these women are doing, work that was exclusively reserved for the poor. Gleaning is the action of combing through a field after the harvest to pick up whatever leftover crops remain, and is part of the reason that we use the word glean nowadays to describe extracting bits of information from a book or some similar source. Whatever bits and pieces of food were scrounged up by these folks would be theirs to keep, to either eat or resell, completely free of charge, which provided the poor and destitute with a means of survival and providing for themselves. From about the 16th through 19th centuries, this practice would be rather popular, and in some regions it was even protected by law under the pretext that it was a God-given right, since a few verses in Deuteronomy and Leviticus outline that these forgotten or leftover crops should be left for the poor, widowed, and orphaned. This specific painting, however, is devoid of those religious tones, and instead seeks to depict reality as it was. These women are surviving, and to do so, they must do this back-breaking labor without any additional compensation. And they're not exactly ecstatic about it, as you would imagine. There is also an intentional contrast between the subject of the Gleaners and the abundant harvest, as the distance between these elements in the painting further emphasizes the distance between the classes and the ostracization of the Gleaners from their peers during this time. Even the distance between the guard on the horse and the harvesters underscores this point, as the hired guardsman likely represents the field owner, separating himself even more so from his laborers. This painting, therefore, becomes much more of a political statement, as it focuses on the struggle and standing of the women gleaners, rather than any sort of gratitude to the farmer or field owner for their generosity. While it may not seem strange to us today to have the poor be the subject of such a straightforward depiction like this, without any religious or mythological tones, this was revolutionary in 1890 when the painting was unveiled. This work therefore stands as a testament to not only the spirit of the working class, but as a reminder to the rich of the cost of their comfort, and in that sense, acts as a role reversal. Therefore, the painting itself takes the status quo and flips it on its head to force the viewers to confront that reality, and perhaps their own hypocrisy, which is also a very Savannah Claw concept, is it not? And there is no one more fitting to be likened to this painting in my mind than Ruggie Bucci. Ruggie is a hard-working individual. He is the definition of a hustler, and he's not in the game for the thrill of it either. It doesn't matter if it's food, coin, clothes, or educational help. If Ruggie can get his mitts on it, then he's going to grab it and run with it. And he's not afraid to work for it either if he must. The guy is also the embodiment of, if it's free, it's for me. And he's got every right and reason to be this way. So when it comes to this painting, I can't help but be reminded of Ruggie. Sure, he desires to flip the script and not have to worry about his next meal, but he's not quite there yet. And even with such ambitions, it can be difficult to overcome social and economic barriers. The game doesn't do as great of a job at explaining this in Book 2 as it could have, and it seems like a lot of Ruggie's struggles are implied in various story beats, which is fine if you have that context, but since some of it is behind a paywall, it's not the best representation of his character. However, if you take a look at the manga panels that describe Ruggie's motivations for helping Leona in his plot in Book 2, the impact of the visuals is so much stronger and Ruggie's reasoning becomes so much clearer without the need for the vignettes and supplementals to fill in those gaps. I think if you tie this to what we know about the King of Beasts story, the fundamental trust that the Savannah Claw students have in Leona, everything just makes way more sense. All of which I think can also be connected back to this painting with Ruggie in mind. You see, in the game, the King of Beasts is touted to be a great leader who brought equity to the Sunset Savannah, a king who elevated the status of the hyenas, yet the Sunset Savannah we see and hear about in the Cloud Calling event is struggling, and it seems that there is still a great disparity between the different kinds of beast folk, given what Neji says about the capital city's diversity. Leona also grumbles quite a bit on how the land's resources are currently being mismanaged by the royalty, and however unreliable a narrator Leona may be, I think there is still some truth to be found in his criticism. Ruggie, for his part, is dreaming of a future where the prosperity of the King of Beasts' time is brought around again, a time where he wouldn't have to resort to 30,000 part-time jobs just to survive, perhaps. One where maybe he wouldn't be looked down upon because of where he comes from or the type of beastman that he is, and I think that's something that this painting also seeks to encourage. These sentiments, I think, are also why Ruggie is so reluctant to give up on Leona at the climax of Book 2, even after he nearly gets dusted, which is something that I never fully understood until I saw those manga panels. Speaking of these motivations though, this desire to flip the script if you will, remember how I mentioned in the art overview that the painting seeks to depict reality without any grander influences to soften the blow? I may have neglected to mention that with this intention in mind, this piece was also purposefully painted at the size that was usually reserved during this time for important subjects like religious or mythological scenes. I may have also neglected to mention that this work was produced after the French Revolution of 1848 and was revealed during a salon exhibition, and during this time salons were typically only enjoyed by the rich. So how do you think this painting was received by its contemporaries? Terribly. When this painting depicting laborers was unveiled at a size that was normally reserved for religious and mythological depictions, I'm sure you can imagine the utter contempt the audience, comprised of high society folk, held for it. And while I cannot speak to the artist's true intentions or their sentiments, I do think that this was the whole point. A point that speaks very well to Ruggie. The conversations this piece provoked then, and even provokes now, also tie to this hyena quite well. So my brain now kind of equates these two together. Next up, we have The Roses of Heliogabalus by Alma-Tadema. And at first glance, it seems rather beautiful. There is some sort of banquet going on with music and a cascade of flower petals, folks swimming in this beautiful floral sea, soft fluffy pillows, and a pomegranate that's probably not foreshadowing anything. The scene just seems like an extravagant and somewhat unusual party, which it kind of is, because in truth this scene is inspired by a party that the titular subject, Heliogabalus, supposedly hosted, if the Historia Augusta Antonius Heliogabalus is to be believed. If the name Heliogabalus isn't familiar to you, don't worry, because I also had no idea who this guy was either when I first learned about this painting. Heliogabalus, or rather Emperor Heliogabalus, ruled Rome from about 218 to 222 CE and was purportedly wildly hedonistic. Most of the documentation we have on him is scandalous in nature, making it hard to piece together fact from fiction, but a party as wild and extravagant as this depiction suggests fits right in line with who he supposedly was and how he supposedly acted. Now, based off that description, which of these feasters do you think is the emperor? Perhaps it is the fellow at the center of the table, the one who looks delighted by the floral display, raising his cup to it. Or is it the lounging fellow who looks mildly amused? Cast your votes now. The emperor is in fact the lounging man, and we know this because he's dressed in an outfit described by Herodian in his History of the Roman Empire. Heliogabalus calmly watches the scene unfold, unperturbed by his parasites, guests swimming in the flower petals he so painstakingly arranged for them. Surely these drunken, blissfully ignorant guests wouldn't be so out of sorts that they couldn't even lift a few flower petals off of them, right? Surely this is a scene of merriment, no? They couldn't possibly be suffocating under the hundreds of thousands of flower petals. Or could they? Yes, dear viewer, this is in fact the scene of a slaughter, as this painting is meant to depict a very specific scene from the Historia Augusta, in which Heliogabalus set up a banqueting room with a reversible ceiling he once overwhelmed his parasites with violets and other flowers, so that some were actually smothered to death, being unable to crawl out the top. During Alma-Tadema's time, violets were symbolic of modesty and faithfulness, virtues which Heliogabalus would not have known existed. So the more apropos lustful roses were swapped in for this depiction in order to better resonate with contemporary viewers. However, regardless of the specifics, and whether this truly happened, because the logistics of setting this sort of thing up would have been wild, the painting remains a reminder of the dangers of immorality and indulgence, even in seemingly innocent circumstances. As Nora Nahira of Medium so elegantly puts, Alma successfully delivered the sinister scene depicting a sadistic, reckless, self-indulgent juvenile man in a seemingly innocent, vibrant, and luscious pool of rose petals, as if we wear a rose-colored tinted glass and ignore the red flags. In many ways, I think Jade just is this moment, a beautifully curated image that gets written off for its beauty by those who aren't willing to look beyond the surface. Yet, once you've gotten a peek at the truth, you can never view it in the same way, as it becomes unsettling and haunting to you, the viewer. Jade, for his part, appears in every way at first glance to be the perfect gentleman. He seems like the kind of person that you can trust, and he proves how reliable he is on multiple occasions. In his dorm uniform vignette, Jade is able to meet Ville's every demand and even at times exceeds his expectations. In Trey's labware vignette, Jade procures for him a tart in exchange for Trey's specially grown strawberries, a tart that's from an extremely famous bakery, one that usually sells out early. And yes, technically Floyd was the one who got it, but only because he was forced to by Jade and Azul as punishment. So Jade can still take some form of credit here. During the first Halloween event, Jade manages the budget for all of the dorms and for the party, in which he also helps all the guests get settled, answers their questions, and does every little action with absolute professionalism. Even in Jade's ceremonial vignette story, he comes off so gentlemanly, so softly, that Trey mistakenly assumes Jade's a pushover. But all of these meticulously planned actions merely veil Jade's darker intentions, the pieces of himself that if you were to see them, you'd likely run as far away as you possibly could. Jade is, for all intents and purposes, a selfish sadist, and we can see this demonstrated in many, many story beats. He's got his little Beans Day tirade, his questionable voice line in Floyd's dorm uniform vignette, his choice of a whistle as a gift for Azul and Floyd, which you know is going to result in Floyd becoming the most annoying person on campus for the next 2 weeks, the line about the octopus plushie, the line about his family in that same event, his explanation of his Soom's plan, which inevitably backfires on him, his dossier on the Octavanel students, and even in his dorm uniform vignette, when he's being a proper gentleman, he just has to sneak in that sus line about having his sources. We even get a voice line in his Merform card where Jade himself admits that, in all of his actions, he's practicing self-restraint. I shudder to think of what we could be enduring if Jade did not. While you can make arguments for Jade to not be quite so bad, or for some of these actions to be little jokes on his part, I think he has an undeniably unsettling presence that these actions only serve to enhance. His brief appearance in Book 2 during the investigative phase also alludes to his darker tendencies, and the first volume of the Savannah Club manga backs this up with a fantastic visual of his threatening glare. In Book 3, we can see him and Floyd playing off each other in this regard too, with various voice lines about the staff, debts, and our efforts being in vain, some of which aren't that bad in comparison to the everything else we've discussed, but even post-Book 3, Jade is still so subtly menacing. During Book 4, we get his stern warning, or declaration, I'm not sure which is more correct, about those who dare to get close to him only to then cross him. And now in Book 7, we get to see his dream, which is quite hilarious, but also terrifying, as calm, reserved Jade is dragging his friend and brother down to the most dangerous place in the sea for science. The calm Jade has while he says such concerning things, while he does such terrible things, is rather reminiscent of the unbothered emperor in this painting, no? Jade not only stands back and watches as the confusion and terror take a hold of those standing in his way, but he relishes in watching it all unfold. I don't think for a second if he was present for this flowery spectacle that he wouldn't be amused by its deeper meaning, and I can guarantee you he'd make a comment about it that alludes to himself or his desires just to see what your reaction would be if he pulled a similar stunt. Jade may not be as cruel as the Emperor, and I doubt he'd go through all of the effort of setting up the flower petal trap. Dragging you into the cold, dark depths is much easier, honestly, but this cruelty masked by that which is generally regarded as beautiful just represents him so well, in my opinion. Another work with more historical backstory is Stańczyk by Jan Matejko, which depicts a rather famous court jester from Poland's Renaissance. The full title of the painting, Stańczyk during a ball at the court of Queen Bona in the face of the loss of Smolensk, informs us that the painter is playing around a bit with the historical timeline, as Queen Bona came into power after the loss of Smolensk, but that matters little in the grand scheme of the painting's story. Stańczyk is the court's jester and is dressed in some brilliant red traditional attire. However, he's not at the center of the ball as the name of the painting might suggest. Instead, he's tucked away from the crowd in a small room where he sits in a finely carved wooden chair, almost deflated, with a somber expression on his face. He looks off at the floor in front of him as if the weight of the world is in his mind, completely unaware of the viewer's presence. On the right side of the painting, we can see the distant figures of partygoers in their finery, seemingly ignorant to the jester's distress as they continue to go about their festivities. On the left, we see a table with some crumpled papers, which seems like they could be rather important, yet they've been haphazardly placed or maybe even purposefully obscured, with even the table covering being jostled in the process and wrinkling. Perhaps these papers contain a tragic message which only the jester has seen. Or perhaps the jester sits contemplative because he dreads being the one to deliver bad news. Or perhaps even still, the papers had bad news for him and no one else, and so he's a little mad at whatever it contained. Though the contents of the pages themselves can't be read by viewers, given the full title of the work, the characters within it, and the general timeline surrounding this event, it is largely agreed upon that these disregarded documents are informing the crown that the city of Smolensk was taken by Moscow. Despite the revelry occurring in the background, Poland is currently at war, and they just suffered a massive blow by losing this city. Yet the nobles don't even seem to care, only the jester does, as if only Stańczyk understands the true gravity of the situation. The capture of this city was a very real event that happened in a very real war, and Stańczyk was in fact a very real person. He was a man of great intellect, who used wit and satire to criticize his fellows, as any jester worth their salt would. However, he did not merely entertain his audiences, but instead provided well-delivered insights on current issues and was able to critique the crown with grace, eventually becoming associated with the truth given his talent for pointing out hypocrisy. As such, Stańczyk is the perfect subject for this moment, this blending of historical occasions and figures, as he's the only one who can truly understand what this loss means for the future of the country, and he is probably the only person who can give that criticism to the crown and make them understand how significant this is. There is also a delightful contrast between the bright attire of his clothing and his solemn expression, between the revelry of the party and the reality, and no matter what one chooses to see, whether they crumple the letters or not, the facts cannot be changed. The only thing our twist equivalent is missing is the ability to practice introspection, because the guy I associate with this painting the most is Ace. Now, Ace is not one of my favorite characters. However, he plays a very pivotal role in the story as one of our truth tellers. He will not back down, nor will he hide in the face of something he knows to be wrong, and we get to see him do this on several different occasions. Book 1 in particular is all about Ace pointing out hypocrisy, and while he may not be as graceful in this endeavor as Stańczyk was reported to be, the parallel, I think, becomes quite clear. During Book 1, we get to meet Riddle in his tyrant phase, and while Ace does make the first blunder and is responsible for such actions, the resulting spiral of tyranny is much too quickly, and only Ace has the strength to stand against it. He's the only one who points it out, the only one who speaks up, and it is because of him that Riddle is able to start healing. Without Ace, this growth would not have been possible. Without Ace, things would have gotten much worse. And without Ace, there's no way of knowing whether Riddle would have survived his overblot, as everyone else was ready to turn tail and run, but Ace, Deuce, and Grimm's determination convinced the others to stay the course, which resulted in Riddle being saved. While these events directly parallel the connection between the Fool and the Crown, Ace has a couple other moments and story beats that do this too. The Ghost Bride event provides Ace another chance to prove himself, and in a way, I suppose this is also an example of the Fool going up against the Crown, as Eliza is also a princess. or was a princess, I guess. But we also have a few moments in Playful Land where Ace chews out Ernesto for his failings too. On top of this, Ace seems like one of the most socially aware characters who can play off anyone in any situation. We see him get Epple to open up a little bit in his ceremonial rose vignette, Ace distracts the museum guard in Book 3, and he saves us rather smoothly from a Lilia poisoning in Stitch's Tropical Turbulence. Most importantly, for my personal consideration, is that I associate Ace with the color red more than anyone else in Heartstable, even more than Riddle, and Stańczyk is wearing red, and the painting is majorly red. So there is that too. Seriously though, Ace would make a fantastic jester, and would make fantastic commentary if he was in a similar situation as what is being depicted in the painting. Of that I have no doubt. I also have no doubt that he would not take a minute to sit and contemplate like Stańczyk does, and would rather rush into the feast hall with his declarations. But in the end, what he would end up saying isn't a lie, and if the people didn't want to hear it, it wouldn't necessarily matter because it is still reality. And that sort of vibe, him being the one to speak out, him being the one to know, him being the one who is able to speak the truth no matter what this occasion is a very strong connection to this painting. And I honestly think that Ace has the makings of being someone great. He's just gotta work on thinking things through a little better and reflecting a bit more. But even as he is right now, I can't help but be reminded of this painting. Next up, we have Monk by the Sea, painted by Caspar David Friedrich, one of my favorite artists. This grand expanse of canvas depicts a solitary figure standing on the shore, looking out towards the vast expanse of sea and sky. There is a soft gradient quality to the transition between the sky, clouds, and sea, which feels a bit ethereal and abstract, yet the composition is grounded by the clear horizon line and the high contrast between the water and the sand. The monk is the only sign of life in the vast expanse, and is rather small in comparison to the natural elements that surround them. Unlike the other art we've discussed so far, there aren't any ties to historical or mythical events in this depiction. And while there is still a message to be found, it's not as concrete or certain, particularly if you're unfamiliar with German Romanticism. Because of this, one can liken any number of reasons to the monk's visit and attribute as much or as little reasoning to the scene as they wish. There are even debates to this day about whether or not this particular painting, and some of Caspar's other works, could actually be classified as the first abstract artworks, despite that movement not starting until long after his death. I even wrote a paper on this very topic back in the day, but this work is, at its core, German Romanticism, and I personally think applying modern movements to older works and insisting they transcend the movements that made them is quite iffy, as it can run the risk of denying works their proper context and intentions. Though I also do find these debates sparking interesting conversations, in this consideration it's best to consider this piece from its original movement, German Romanticism, as that is the context from which I relate it to Twist. If you're unfamiliar with the movement, simply put, German Romanticism seeks to invoke emotion and spirituality through focusing on connections with nature, oftentimes depicting simple countryside living and wild, awe-inspiring landscapes. These works try to invoke emotion in their viewers by returning them to their roots, or the roots of the world, so to speak, in order to remind them of what they may lose if they give themselves over completely to the rapidly changing technologies of industrialization and its associated logical, practical thinking. There is also a bit of spirituality in the thought that only nature can provide a true path to godliness, as it is God's very own creation that one can only really appreciate when they are surrounded by it, oftentimes leading artists to capture these landscapes instead of traditional religious imagery in order to still get their point across about God. From their seat, looking at a tree while surrounded by the industrial smoke and smog is not the same thing as being in the mountains surrounded by the grandeur that is nature, and the spirituality that can come from witnessing such great things. So, a work like this, with that context, isn't merely playing with scale. It is also reminding the viewer that there are things out there much bigger than themselves. Whether you personally want to attribute this to God, the universe, or just the concept of life itself is up to you. But the fact that there are things outside of your own control that you can only bear witness to and not influence yourself is a very strong theme in this work. The monk is small, unassuming, and a witness to the grand, vast, natural expanse before them, furthering this concept with that visual contrast. The color palette of the painting also gives it a somber feel, and to me, an introspective one. It is calm and turbulent, with the waves rolling lazily but the clouds billowing fantastically on the horizon. Such duality also complementing the other parallels of the scale, the size, and such and such. And it is within this lonely contemplation that I believe we can find Malleus. The Briar Valley, on the whole, seems to have a similar sentiment to this artistic movement, with the war we witness in Lilia's dream being a very real example of nature fighting back against industry. It is because of this conflict that we get the Malleus Draconia we know and love, for if events had transpired differently, Malleus might have become an entirely different person. It is also a result of this conflict that Malleus is under the impression that he is by and large alone, as up until Book 7 he had no idea anyone was there for his hatching, and the loneliness of this misconception has seeped into Malleus's core. He often talks about how he is alone and how he's getting left behind by the march of time, and it seems like Malleus is struggling a bit with these feelings. He struggles so much, in fact, that the thought of Lilia leaving him behind at the beginning of Book 7 is what triggers the dream fiasco we later find ourselves in. Loneliness is a big theme when it comes to this guy, and I feel like it is also a big theme when it comes to this painting, given that the monk is isolated and alone. And the activity that the monk is doing, this lovely seaside stroll, is something I can see Malleus frequently doing too. We already know that he likes to tour ruins and abandoned areas, in part because they bring him solace from knowing he isn't the only one getting left behind, so a lonesome stroll on the beach doesn't seem too far-fetched. The idea as well that the monk may be confronting his fleeting mortality, or the potential insignificance of one's own life in the face of this eternal expanse, seems like concepts that resonate with Malleus. He has all sorts of grand powers and can do things that seem impossible, like freezing time and sending places back in time, and even creating his own little universe where time stands still. Yet despite this, he can't truly affect that which matters most. He has dominion over all of nature, but he cannot stop Lilia from dying. He cannot stop anyone from dying, and no matter how much he may wish for things to stay as they are, everything will inevitably move forward without him. Contemplating this is something I imagine Malleus does often, and I think deep down even he knows what he's doing in Book 7 isn't going to hold up forever. It can't. Yet he's still hopeful that it can happen somehow, that he can hold on, and I expect the resolution of this book to teach him a very valuable lesson about seeking to enjoy what he has rather than focusing on what was or could have been. All of that is to say that Malleus's struggles are similar to the feelings that I get when I view this monk in this art. There is a quiet contemplation in the expanse of the sea, a gentle reminder that there are things bigger than us at play, and that it is okay to feel small in the face of it all. The vibe of this artwork is a little dour, which I think suits Malleus's overall aesthetic, and I can easily see him in place of the monk here without the meaning or significance of this painting being altered at all. It is a moment where one can simply exist, and it is where I will be leaving our considerations for today. I hope y'all enjoyed this little dip into the world of art, even if we only ended up covering a couple of characters. But if you did, please let me know down below, or with a like, or maybe even a subscribe. If y'all want a part 2, let me know that as well. And before you go, I just have to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.